Hello and welcome to Ingaland. This is Frank and Kaylin, and today we're going to continue our series on the old Fords of Ingaland. So today's episode is going to be about the 1930 Ford Model A Highboy Roadster. So come on along with and we'll check it out. So this Model A started out as a motor, and I had a friend that had a father that had restored a Model A in the 1970s, and they bought a new motor for it. Well, they had a motor rebuilt, and they put it in the Model A and they could never get it to run. So they took the motor out and put the old motor back in and sold the Model A. So fast forward to the late 1990s, this guy knew that I was interested in old Ford parts and wanted to know if I would be interested in that motor. And I told him that I need to explain that they couldn't get it to run. And I told him, well, a non-running Model A motor is not worth very much. But he had a few other parts, like transmission and some other stuff, and he was a good friend, and so I didn't want to lowball him, so I offered him $500 for this motor, which is way more than anybody should ever pay for a non-running Model A motor. Anyway, I got the motor and the other parts, and I took the motor into my dad's shop, and I took the head off, and the head was totally packed with fiberglass insulation from mice making nests in there. So that took me about one morning to get all that crap out. And then I looked at the cylinders and the valves, and it looked like it had all been redone. So I put the head back on, and then I took the oil pan off to look at the bottom end of the engine, and everything looked like it had been rebuilt. Nothing was rusty, nothing seemed loose. So I put a rebuilt oil pump in it just to be safe, because I had it apart. And then I put it all back together and started to look for a rolling chassis, and was able to find one not very far away locally, and for not a lot of money. So I dragged this rolling chassis home and in my dad's shop, and then we started to put the motor in the chassis and hooked up a radiator and a battery and a temporary gas tank, and decided to see if we could get it to run. And so we did all kinds of, we did a compression check, and it had good compression, and we tried setting the timing both ways off at top dead center as far as we dared, and all we could get it to do is backfire and pop. And so we changed the distributor, tried a different one, same thing, tried a different carburetor, same thing, tried intake and exhaust manifold switch, same thing. And we had taken the timing cover off earlier and looked to see if the timing dots on the two gears were lined up, and they were. Anyway, we started on this project in right about Thanksgiving in November, and by the time that we figured out what was wrong, it was late February, and my dad was getting kind of tired of the thing sitting in the middle of the floor of his shop. So anyway, all we could get it to do was backfire and pop and wouldn't run. And so one day Dad said, well, let's just send for a timing gear and compare it to the one that's in there. And so I said, yeah, okay. So no, timing gear wasn't that expensive. So we sent for a timing gear, and we took the timing cover off the front of the motor and lined it up with the one that was in there, and sure enough, it was a totally different gear, and we have no idea where this gear that was in there came from. But anyway, we took it off and then put on the new gear and lined up the dots and put the timing cover back on and tried to start it, and it started right up, and it purred like a kitten. And it's been running for 30 some years now, so the $500 investment on the motor turned out to be okay. So we had this rolling chassis then with this rebuilt motor in it, and we drove it around here in the farm at Ingaland for a few years, and we had some bus seats on it, and it was real fun to drive it late at night with no lights on it and looking for lightning bugs and stuff. Anyway, about the same time I had a used Chevy S10 pickup, and it got stolen out of our yard during the middle of the day, real close up to the house. I'd left the keys in it, and somebody got in and stole it. So about a month went by, and I got a call from a salvage yard, and the guy asked if I'd had a pickup stolen, and I said, yeah, I did. And he said, well, we got it. And I said, there would be $470 worth of storage fees because it had sat there almost a month. And I said, well, why didn't somebody contact me? And he goes, oh, that's not our job to contact you. Anyway, so he wanted $474 for this storage fee. And so I asked him if it still ran, and so he said, well, whoever stole it took the keys and locked the door. He said, but I'll see if I can get a key at the dealer or something to open the doors. So he did, and then he called me and he said, we tried to start it, but he said the motor's locked up, it's not gonna run. And so I thought, well, I'm not coming to get a pickup that doesn't run and pay a $470 storage fee. So I asked the guy if he would consider taking the transmission out of it and giving it to me, and then he can have the whatever's left. And he jumped right on that deal, so he must have known that there was parts on there that he could make money on. So anyway, got the transmission out, and I got the transmission a few weeks later, and so it was a nice Borg Warner T5 transmission. I had been watching some of the Model A Restore magazines I had. They had an ad in the back for converting a T5 transmission into a Model A running gear, and I thought, oh man, how fun that would be to have a 5-speed transmission modern in Model A. So I sent for the kit, and in a couple of weekends had it installed. And so then we were driving it around on the farm with just the bus seats, but with a T5 transmission, and it turned out to be really fun to drive. You could downshift at any speed, and it had in 5th gear it had an unbelievably fast top end with just the frame. But and so I decided, gosh, we got a rebuilt motor and a 5-speed transmission. I should find a body. And so I started looking for a Roadster body on eBay, and I looked for a couple of years, and I didn't want to take a real good Model A, and I wanted something that was kind of rough and hot rod material. And anyway, one finally came up in Montana, and so I got my dad to drive with me, and I borrowed my brother's Dodge 1-ton pickup in a horse trailer, and we went out to Montana to get it. And I think by the time I got there, I was into it for over $400 in gas by this time. Anyway, I got there and looked at the thing, and it wasn't anywhere near what he had claimed in the ads. It had been totally misrepresented, and he claimed it was ready to be put on a frame and go, and it wasn't anywhere near ready to go. So I was going to back out of the deal and just tell him to rip up my check, and I was going to turn around and go back home. And my dad got me to the side and said, you know, he said, we've come all this way, you got all this money in gas, you're going to have that much going home. He said, why don't you just take it? And he said, you can fix the things that were bad. And the guy that had sold it said there had been all kinds of body work on it done, and there was some body work, but it was really crude even by my standards. So anyway, I got the body home, and I spent most of that first summer welding in the patch panels and all that kind of stuff. And then I painted it myself in the garage here, and put the body on the frame. And one of the things that was real fun, I'd always wanted a traditional Highboy Roadster, and when I was a kid, my dad said that to both my brother and I, we could have all the Model A's we wanted, but there would be no hot rodding them. So anyway, I was in my late 50s, and I thought, well, you know what, I'm old enough to make my own decisions, so I'm going to finally have a traditional Highboy Roadster. And so I was going to get a 32 grill shell for it, just like most guys do, and they're available and they make reproductions of them. But one day a friend of mine came in the farm here, and he had this radiator shell and these two seats that he had found in a rock pile out in the middle of North Dakota somewhere when he was doing power line work. And he asked if I wanted to use them, and I looked at him and I thought, nah, you know, I got to do something better than that. Well, anyway, I kept walking by that grill shell, and the more I looked at it, I thought, God, I'm starting to really like that. It started to grow on me. So I measured it, and it was the perfect width for the Model A radiator. It was just like 4 inches too long. So I just sectioned out some on the bottom and welded it up. And it's from I think a 29 Pontiac, and I get, a lot of times I'll go to car shows and there'll be Model A guys there, and they'll look at this and they'll go, what is that thing? It's just a Model A, but it has a Oldsmobile or Pontiac grill shell. And then the seats were just out of a really old car that he had, or that he had found in this rock pile, and I think from a car from the 20s. And anyway, I had them sandblasted and powder coated, and I love them because they're hinged and they swing up so you have access to the back of the Model A. And they're not real comfortable unless you have a cushion in there. But I like that kind of aviation bomber look. So then the taillights we were sitting in the cabin one day, and the neighbor to the north of me, who was an old retired plumber, had these travel trailers that were from the 30s, and he died, and the people that bought the property were cleaning out all the property, and they were just hauling it all to the dump. And I was looking out the window, and I looked over there, and I thought, look at those taillights. I said, we got to go see what they check them out. And so we went over, and I thought, God, these would be perfect. And just a screwdriver, and it came off. And I love the little license plate holder. Let me see if the lights will come on. Yeah, and then I got authentic license plates for Minnesota from 1930. But yeah, so that's it. We drive this Model A more than any of the other ones, just because it's so much fun with the modern transmission. One year we decided to go to the car show, and my dad was here, and I had a buddy, so we were going to drive all three of the old Fords to the car show. And I asked my dad which car he wanted to drive, and he said, oh, I'll drive the Roadster. And I said, okay. So we all took off and went to the car show, and Dad came kind of putting in the Model A, and he had a huge grin on his face, and he kind of backed into the spot and got out. I went over and I said, well, how did it go, Dad? He goes, oh man, he said, I always wanted to have a Model A hot rod when I was a kid. He goes, Dad, you told us we couldn't have any hot rod Model A's. And he goes, yeah, that's because that's what my dad told me. But anyway, he secretly had always wanted to have a hot rod too.